Hello, everyone. To lighten the COVID's cloud a little, Driftwood Theatre is performing something different, exploring the new Zoom medium. Instead of on stage, we are online. Think casual, think drive-in theatre, think party line telephone, think fun. So welcome to Driftwood Players' reading of the Old Possum Book of Practical Cats by T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot loved cats and thought they were special for two qualities they possessed in an extreme degree. They were both highly dignified and at the same time utterly comical. And then there was Mr. Mistoffelees.
Well, you ought to know Mr. Mistoffelees, the original conjuring cat. Oh, there can be no doubt about that. Please listen to me and don't scoff. His inventions are off his own bat. There's no such cat in the metropolis. He holds all the patent monopolies for performing surprising illusions and creating eccentric confusions. At prestidigitation and legerdemain, he'll defy examination and deceive you again. The greatest magicians have something to learn from Mr. Mistoffelees' conjuring turn. Presto, away we go, and we all say, "Oh, well, I never. Was there ever a cat so clever as magical Mr. Mistoffelees?" He is quiet and small. He is black from his ears to the tip of his tail. He can creep through the tiniest crack. He can walk on the narrowest rail. He can pick any card from a pack. He is equally cunning with dice. He is always deceiving you into believing that he's only hunting for mice. He can play any trick with a cork or a spoon and a bit of fish paste. If you look for a knife or a fork and you think it is merely misplaced, you have seen it one moment, the next it is gone. But you'll find it next week lying out on the lawn. And we all say, "Oh, well, I never. Was there ever a cat so clever as magical Mr. Mistoffelees?" His manner is vague and aloof. You would think there was nobody shyer. But his voice has been heard on the roof while he was asleep by the fire. And he's sometimes been heard by the fire while he was about on the roof. At least we all heard that somebody purred, which is incontestable proof of his singular magical powers. And I've known the family to call him in from the garden for hours while he was asleep in the hall. And not long ago, this phenomenal cat produced 7 kittens right out of a hat. And we all say, "Oh, well, I never. Was there ever a cat so clever as magical Mr. Mistoffelees?"
Never. But the Great Rumpus Cat did once accomplish a disappearing act in the awful battle of the Peaks and the Pollicles.
Of the awful battle of the Peaks and the Pollicles, together with some account of the participation of the Pugs and the Poms, and the intervention of the Great Rumpus Cat. The Peaks and the Pollicles, everyone knows, are proud, unimplacable, passionate foes. It's always the same wherever one goes.
And the Pugs and the Poms, though most people say they do not like fighting, yet once in a way they will now and again join in the fray, and they bark, 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 bark.
Now, on the occasion of which I shall speak, almost nothing had happened for nearly a week, and that's a long time for a poll or a peak.
The big police dog was away from his beat. I don't know the reason, but most people think he'd slipped into the Wellington Arms for a drink. And no one at all was about on the street when a peak and a pollicle happened to meet. They did not advance or exactly retreat, but they stared at each other and scraped their hind feet and started to bark, 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 until you could hear them all over the park.
Now, the peak, although people may say what they please, is no British dog, but even Chinese. And so all the peaks, when they heard the uproar, some came to the window, some came to the door. There was surely a dozen, more likely a score. And together they started to grumble, wheeze, and they're uffery, stuffery, even Chinese. But a terrible din is what pollicle's like. For your pollicle dog is a door Yorkshire tyke, and his broad Scottish cousins are snappers and biters, and every dog jack of 'em notable fighters. And so they stepped out with their pipers in order, playing When the Blue Bonnets Come Over the Border. Then the pugs and the poms held no longer aloof, some from the balcony and some from the roof, joined in to the din with a bark, 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 until you could hear them all over the park.
And now, when these bold heroes together assembled, the traffic all stopped and the underground trembled.
Some of the neighbours were so much afraid that they started to ring up the fire brigade.
When suddenly, up from a small basement flat, why, who should stalk out but the Great Rumpus Cat?
His eyes were like fireballs, fearfully blazing. He gave a great yawn, and his jaws were amazing.
And when he looked out through the bars of the area, you never saw anything fiercer or hairier.
And what with the glare of his eyes and his yawning, the peaks and the pollicles quickly took warning.
He looked up at the sky and he gave a great leap, and they, every last one of them, scattered like sheep.
And when the police dog returned to his feet, there wasn't a single one left in the street.
Gone, all gone, just like magic. From this helter-skelter commotion, we take off for the better part of town, to see and be seen, sauntering with Buster Jones, the cat about town.
Buster Jones is not skin and bones. In fact, he's remarkably fat. He doesn't haunt pubs. He's got 8 or 9 clubs, for he's a St. James Street cat. He's the cat we all greet as he walks down the street in his coat of fastidious black. No commonplace mousers have such well-cut trousers or such an impeccable back. In the whole of St. James's, the smartest of names is the name of this Brummel of cats. And we're all of us proud to be nodded or bowed to by Buster Jones in white spats. His visits are occasional to the senior educational, as it is against the rules for any one cat to belong to both that and the joint superior schools. For a similar reason, when game is in season, he is found not at Fox's, but at Blimp's. He is frequently seen at the gay stage and screen, which is famous for winkles and shrimps. In the season, venison, he gives his benson to the pot hunter's succulent bones. And just before noon, not a moment too soon, to drop in for a drink at the drones. When he's seen in a hurry, there's probably a curry at the Siamese or at the Glutton. If he looks rather glum, then he's lunched at the Tomb on cabbage, rice pudding, and mutton. So much in this way passes Mistoffelees' day. At one club or another he's found. It can be no surprise that before our eyes he's grown unmistakably round. He's a 25-pounder, or I'm a bounder, and he's putting on weight every day. But he's so well preserved because he's observed all his life a routine, so he'll say, or to put it in rhyme, I shall last out my time, is the word of this stoutest of cats. It must, and it shall be, spring in Pall Mall when Bustopher Jones wears white spats.
Spring may be the dandy's time to parade, but it is also the housewife's time to spring clean. We turn to the orderly household of the old Gumby Cat.
I have a Gumby cat in mind. Her name is Jenny Anydots. Her coat is of the tabby kind with tiger stripes and leopard spots. All day she sits upon the stair or on the steps or on the mat. She sits and sits and sits and sits, and that's what makes a Gumby cat. But when the day's hustle and bustle is done, then the Gumby cat's work is but hardly begun. And when all the family's abed and asleep, she tucks up her skirts down the basement to creep. She's deeply concerned with the ways of the mice. Their behavior's not good, their manners not nice. And so when she's got them lined up on the matting, she teaches them music, crocheting, and tatting. I have a Gumby cat in mind. Her name is Jenny Anydots. Her equal would be hard to find. She likes the warm and sunny spots. All day she sits beside the hearth, or on the bed, or on me at. She sits and sits and sits and sits. And that's what makes a Gumby cat. But when the day's hustle and bustle is done, then the Gumby cat's work is but hardly begun. As she finds that the mice cannot ever be quiet, she shirts their to a regular diet. And believing that nothing is done without trying, she sets right to work with her baking and frying. She makes them a mouse cake of bread and dried peas, and a beautiful fry of lean bacon and cheese. I have a Gumby cat in mind. Her name is Jenny Anydots. The curtain cord she likes to wind and tie it into sailor knots. She sits upon the windowsill or any place that's smooth and flat. She sits and sits and sits and sits. And that's what makes a Gumby cat. But when the day's hustle and bustle is done, then the Gumby cat's work is but hardly begun. She thinks that the cockroaches just need employment to prevent them from idle and wanton destroyment. So she's formed from that lot of disorderly louts a troop of well-disciplined, helpful Boy Scouts with a purpose in life and a good deed to do. Well, she's even created a Beatles tattoo. So for all Gumby cats, let's now give 3 cheers. On whom well-ordered households depend, it appears.
Hooray, hooray, hooray! And we leave that impeccably tidy house for the glitz and the glam of Broadway. Oh, wait, I mean, perhaps, the glitz and the sham of Broadway.
Well, Gus is the cat at the theatre door. His name, as I ought to have told you before, is really Asparagus. That's such a fuss to pronounce that usually we just call him Gus. His coat's very shabby, he's thin as a rake, and he suffers from palsy that makes his paw shake. Yet he was in his youth quite the smartest of cats, but no longer a terror to mice and to rats. For he isn't the cat that he was in his prime, though his name was quite famous, he says, in its time. And whenever he joins his friends in the club, which takes place at the back of the neighboring pub, he loves to regale them, if someone else pays, with anecdotes drawn from his palmiest days. For he once was a star of the highest degree. He has acted with Irving. He's acted with Tree. And he likes to relate his success on the halls, where the gallery once gave him 7 cat calls. But his grandest creation, as he loves to tell, was Fire Fro Fiddle, the fiend of the fell. I have played, so he says, every possible part, and I used to know 70 speeches by heart. I'd extemporize backchat. I knew how to gag, and I knew how to let the cat out of the bag. I knew how to act with my back and my tail. With an hour of rehearsal, I never could fail. I'd a voice that could soften the hardest of hearts, whether I took the lead or in character parts. I have sat by the bedside of poor little Nell. When the curfew was rung, then I swung on the bell. In the pantomime season, I never fell flat, and I once understudied Dick Whittington's cat. But my grandest creation, as history will tell, was Fire Fro Fiddle, the fiend of the fell. And if someone will give him a tootful of gin, he will tell how he once played a part in East Lynne. At a Shakespeare performance, he once walked on Pat when some actor suggested the need for a cat. He once played a tiger, he could do it again, which an Indian colonel pursued down a drain. And he thinks that he still can, much better than most, produce blood-curdling noises to bring on the ghost. And he once crossed the stage on a telegraph wire to rescue a child when a house was on fire. And he says, now these kittens, they do not get trained as we did in the days when Victoria reigned. They never get drilled in a regular troop, and they think they are smart just to jump through a hoop. And he'll say as he scratches himself with his claws, well, the theater's certainly not what it was. These modern productions are all very well, but there's nothing to equal, from what I can tell, that moment of mystery when I made history. As Fire Fro Fiddle, the fiend from the fell.
Good night, everyone. From our houses to your houses, having fun. We'll see you next time for our 3rd and final installment of those crazy characters, The Practical Cats by T.S. Eliot. Driftwood Players signing off. Sweet dreams tonight.